This lecture, this shiur, is going to be titled "Find Living Waters, Dig Your Own Wells." Find living waters, dig your own wells. After doing a bit of research on the subject matter of the wells, I really was able to come across some things that were quite fascinating and interesting. And I believe it will leave here today with a new sense of purpose about finding and digging deeper into our relationship with the Creator of the universe. Prior to these verses that we will read about the digging of the wells, it shows, sort of follows along. Isaac is sort of in the shadow of Abraham. Abraham sort of overshadows last parsha and this parsha. And even in the process of what we're going to see, he's going to be digging wells. He's still being overshadowed by his father Abraham, because the wells were dug by Abraham's servants and later on Isaac as well. And so we find sort of the final mark of maturity for Isaac. He finally becomes his own man in this text. And we're going to talk about what makes an individual become finally self-realized, finally at the place to where you're really seriously at the place that you're supposed to be, connecting to the Creator. It says that he began to grow, his crops became very successful, his herds began to grow, became an extremely wealthy, powerful man. At some level, Isaac had become like a king in the region. And we see that because even though they had disputes with the Philistines, they were respected by the other, city-states around. And they were respected in such a level that they wanted to make sure that they had a peace treaty. And what we'll see in this text is they actually do develop a peace treaty to make sure that we respect the territory that everybody's in and nothing negative happens. So we start off at the 15th verse, and it says that the Philistines stopped up all the wells that his father's servants dug in the days of Abraham's father. They filled them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you have become too strong for us." So Isaac left there, and he encamped in the wadi of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac returned and redug wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, and which the Philistines had stopped up after the death of Abraham. He gave them the identical names that his father gave him. And Isaac's servants dug in the wadi and found a well of flowing water there, or living water. The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." He named the well Isich, which is because they quarreled and disputed over the water. Verse 21, it says, "And when they dug another well, they quarreled over that one as well. So he named it Sitnah, and he moved from there and dug another well. They did not quarrel over this well, so he named it Rehovot, saying, 'Now the Lord has given us space so that we may increase in the land.'" Parshat Todot is telling about the redigging of the wells of Abraham. The story of Yitzchak's life, as I said before, is overshadowed by his father, the great Chacham of Torah, the great leader of the people of Israel, and he's the father of actually three religions today as we stand here. And the Yitzchak's life is linked deeply with the concept of the wells. There's something very profound about the wells. When I read this story, I realized there's something a bit deeper. Over the last few years of doing these lectures, and we would sort of talk about the wells a little bit and what the wells would mean, but I knew that there was something deeper in the well. And so I really began to dig, and I hope that you guys will be able to see this as well. When Rivka became his wife, and on account of her kindness at the well, remember, Isaac got his wife was at a well. Yitzhak was perpetually involved in redigging his father's wells. Now, what was the process of redigging the wells? Removing the dirt, removing earth, soil, rocks, wood, debris from the well. They just filled it in with whatever they could fill in. There is a significance behind what this means. Now, we all know on the Peshat level, the basic level, what was put in the well was material. So let's just say this material things. But on the Sod level, we're talking about the material world, correct? Materialism. We're talking about things that cloud the way of spirituality. And we're going to recognize that water or living water represents the Word of God and the connection that we have to God, because God is living water in our life. So if you'll understand the two concepts, they'll slowly begin to pull together. The Hebrew word for wells here is be'erot, and it means it means just a well, right? I hope this word will become familiar with you in this lecture, so that you can begin to understand its importance. The Midrash provides many different levels of understanding about the well that I think it's going to be profound for all of us today, because we'll go from here realizing that we have a responsibility to also dig wells. Part of the well digging that we'll have to do is to dig the wells of our fathers. And we say the wells of our fathers, we're not talking about our paternal fathers. We're talking about our spiritual fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have to redig those wells, meaning that we have to go back and connect to the Torah of our fathers, of our spiritual fathers, and begin to dig for the deeper meaning of how they connected to the Creator. But we really won't come into our own until we have dug our own well. We had to dig through a lot of dirt when it comes to digging our own well. If you remember in your own spiritual journey, how much stuff did you have to gnaw through to finally get to a place of spiritual connectedness to God? And for many of us, that labor is so hard and so difficult that you feel like you want to give up. But you have to realize, for us to really truly connect to the Creator and really connect spiritually, as distant as you may believe you may be, or as far away from living water as you may think you may be, if you're persistent to remove the material world, physicality, remove the junk that gets in your way of your life, the quicker you're going to get to the living water. The living water isn't in the well is at the living water. Do you understand? The well is at the living water. It's not like you dig and then water comes. It's that the water's there and you have to dig down to where the water is. Very important concept. The digging continues until we hit what is called living waters and connect with the very essence of our soul. The very fact that when we dig down to the lowest level, we're also digging down to micro elements of our character, our midot, that we have to kind of deal with. It's the thing that we discover and hit by the do personal prayer, that we actually sit down before Hashem and we begin to dig down and ask Him to remove certain items that you and only you know is in the deepest part of that well. You never know what's in the well till you start digging. Now, interestingly enough, I would say that most of us have no clue what's in the well until we start digging. And then when we start digging, it becomes so frustrating and so annoying that you just are not sure you're ready to penetrate any further down into the well. And at some point, you're going to find out that it takes digging until your fingernails bleed spiritually, until you can really get through to that level. The digging of the well requires an exerting of ourselves and a labor that no one else can do. Abraham dug his wells. Yitzhak decided, I will go redig my father's well. Well, the problem is this, is that if any one of us in this room think that you can circumvent the digging of your own well by simply digging in the wells of the forefathers, you're missing the point. Sure, the forefathers had to dig the well. Yes, we have to dig into their well to find out what they did and how deep that they came to the source, but ultimately we have to come to our own well. We have to dig in our own well. Let's look at Yitzhak's well in the Torah that we just read. He dug anew the wells of water which had been dug in the days of Abraham his father. And each time the Philistines came and just filled them back in. And can you imagine how frustrating it was for him to attempt every time he dug a well and then came back, because what would happen is herdsmen would, cycle back through during the season and find the well's been filled up. Many of our lives are filled with things that you thought you had dealt with already, right? And you come back and the well's filled up again. Well, who's filling up the well in this life that we have in the modern age? Well, what fills in the well is materialism. What fills in the well is the cares of worldly things. What fills in the well are things that have not been reproved or taken care of or negotiated in your spiritual walk. And what happens is you come back to a well, you're thinking, I'm coming back to a place that I thought I dealt with, and all of a sudden, it's here again. It's frustrating. The herdsmen of Ger quarreled with Yitzhak's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. It is interesting because one would get the sense when you're beginning to dig in the wells, you're forcing yourself through the suffering of physicality in the physical world and the torments of difficulties of life, you finally almost reside to the fact that you feel like this is permanent. This has been claimed by somebody else and it can't be resolved. I'll never have living water. But the reason why that it seems to be so impossible is you're not digging your own well, you're digging someone else's well. And it's important you have to dig your own well. Now, he called the name Esek, because they contended with him. And when they dug another well, they disputed over that one. And so he named it Sitnah, and he moved from there and dug another well. And they did not quarrel over that one, so he called it Rehovot, saying, now Hashem has granted us ample space for us. We shall become fruitful in the land. What is the key here that we learn from this part of the text is that whenever you find yourself in an impenetrable situation, and a difficult, an impasse, that you're not seemingly been able to break through, it's all right to move on. It's all right to move on from that place and find a place where God can allow you to dig your own place, to find your own self. Let's look at some very interesting discussion that comes from the Midrash about the wells, or the digging of the wells, and its connection to the temple. Tomorrow, Rabbi Chaim Richman will be here to speak to us about his work and endeavor to bring and help to bring and build the third Beis Hamikdash. The digging of the wells, very interestingly, has a prophetic element to it that's quite amazing. Why does the Scripture speak at length about the matter of the wells? According to the simple meaning, it does not honor Yitzhak to go on to such details about digging a well. I mean, what is the point of this exhaustive story if he dig a well and they filled it in and he moved? He digs a well. I mean, what's the point? Just say he dug a well until he found one that was open and they became prosperous. Only by digging below the surface of the story can we discover how the wells contain a secret matter about the future world to come. The wellspring of living water alludes to the house of God, which the children of Yitzhak will build. This metaphor for the temple is also mentioned in the prophets. It says in Jeremiah 17:13, because they have forsaken Hashem, the fountain of living water, meaning that Hashem is the fountain. He's the source of the living water. The first well is called Esek, alluding to the first temple where the Babylonians came in and contended with and waged war, and many wars, and made the Israelites into several divisions prior to destroying the temple. The second well was called Sitnah, hatred, a worse name than the first. This refers to the second temple, which was called the name of hatred, as it stated about in the beginning of the kingdom. They wrote Sitnah, hatred, against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. The nations were perpetually full of hatred toward each other. There was this baseless hatred, and the reason why we know that the temple was destroyed was because of this baseless hatred. The third well, Yitzhak called Rehovot, and it means expansiveness, referring to the third temple. May it be built speedily in our day. It means that whenever we talk about this last well, we're talking about a third temple that will be finally built and erected, where the living waters of Hashem will flow out. Zechariah tells us very clearly of an earthquake that will take place. Now, we don't know if this is a metaphor for something spiritual or if it's actually going to take place. It could actually be both. But it says that water, living water, will flow up out of the Temple Mount area across where the Mount of Olives, and it will flow into the Dead Sea and repopulate it, cause growth to come back again. So too will the living waters of Hashem flow from the Temple Mount throughout all the nations. And those who are dry bones in the world, those who are righteous in the nations, who did not have a connection to Hashem, but yet maintained a level of morality and righteousness, those people that we would call B'nai Noach, the people in the nations that lived moral lives, that lived a life of justice, they will be fed living waters and they will come alive. They will come alive. So it's a beautiful thing. The Jewish people will experience life once again. They will experience tshuva and restoration, an amazing concept, and it will come from the waters that come from the Beis HaMikdash. Here's a quote in Devarim 19:8. It says, "For Hashem, your God, will expand your borders as He has sworn to your fathers." It, moreover, states, in regards to the third temple, and this is found in Ezekiel 41:7. It says this, "It, moreover, states in regard to the third temple, the side of the chambers were expanded," talking about the size of the temple. And Rabbi Chaim Chlorfing will be here sometime in the spring, and he's going to be doing a 4-day lecture on the day in the life of temple service, which is going to be really interesting. That is going to be temple service. His book in the back is on the third temple. And the third temple, we know, is going to be much bigger and grander than any of the two temples that were built. When there is peace and unity, the space feels wider. Then we will be able to multiply more while still feel as if there is more space. Today, sadly, we will suffer against the idolatrous hatred of the nations. We're suffering stabbings in the streets of Jerusalem, also in New York. There's this constant struggle, but this constant struggle is to get us to move off of center and to go find a place to dig our own well. Do you understand? The reason why that we're struggling right now with all of the things that are going on that seem like the baseless hatred against God's people, even in Europe right now, they're talking about labeling products so that you would know it comes from Israel so you don't have to buy it, right? I mean, think about what's happening. Nothing really has changed at all in our society. When it gets its worst, if we will realize that this all has a purpose, and the purpose is to get us to move on to greener pastures. The purpose is to get us to go dig our own well and find our own source of the living water of Hashem, because we cannot depend upon the experience and the work and the relationship of our forefathers to sustain us. We have to sustain our own legitimate relationship with the Creator. Let's talk about rediscovering the living waters that are within us. Isaac work was to dig wells in order to reveal living waters that existed under the ground. and to raise it up. The goal is not to make waters flow into the wells, as I said before, but only to reveal the living waters. The idea is that when you dig a well, water doesn't actually flow into the well. You're actually finding the water and digging down into it and bringing it up to the highest level. For in truth, these wells retained by themselves the living waters, yet they are covered up by dirt and mud and pebbles, and when we remove these, the living water is revealed. That is why Isaac's spiritual work to remove all the veils of the physical world and transform them into vessels of divinity and raise them up from far below to above, this is compared to the living waters themselves that we raise up from below. The Rebbe says this. He says, in Emunah healing as well, the goal is to remove all the blocks that block the divine essence of each person, and in this way allow it to shine from inside. Through meditation, through hitparadut, we have the opportunity to remove the dirt, the mud, the pebbles, blocking our souls, rising up to the divine spark within. So this idea of the metaphor of digging in the well is about taking personal responsibility to find the source. Interestingly enough, the source is already within you. The living water is already within you. It doesn't have to be, it's not out there somewhere. It's here. If it's here, means that you only have to dig through the rubbish to get to it. You only have to dig through all of the negative character traits to get to it. You only have to dig through the negative experiences of life to get to it. And it takes patience. And you also have to realize that Hasatan has an obligation to do everything he can to discourage you. So he will try to backfill it every time you take a nap in your journey, right? So the idea is we have to dig hard and deep until we find that living water. But it's already in you. That's the beautiful thing. This living water is not only going to be a sustainer for your life, but also for those people that are around you. If we could only realize that once we have tapped into that true living water that is already down inside of each one of us, if we could just realize how that will change our environment. What does water do when you bring it to the surface? It allows crops to grow. It allows your herds to multiply. Overall, good health and hygiene comes to everybody in the region that has water. Think about this. When you, as the head of a household, the men, the ladies of their household, when you actually begin to remove the rubble and finally reach the living water in which you have a beautiful, sustaining relationship with the Creator, everything will change around you. Your relationships will be sweeter. Your children will be healthier. I mean, just go down and think about the progress and what would happen when you begin to do it. How do we dig this well? I said it earlier, I'll say it again. It's through personal prayer. It's through meditation. It's through study of Torah. Now, why the study of Torah? When you're digging a well, you have to know what debris is. You have to understand what is the difference between the debris that's in the well and the actual well itself. You don't want to dismantle the stones in the wall, right? You want to make sure that you can distinguish between the two. Torah helps you to distinguish between what is good and what is bad, what needs to be removed and what needs to remain. And at the same time, we understand that it's in this process of removing, we actually discover things about ourselves that we didn't know before. Sometimes what we discover is not very pretty, but we discover it. And it's that struggle of bringing it up to the top that's going to make the water sweeter. Let's talk in this last few minutes of the shiur about that which blocks us, the pebbles, the mud, the dirt, the debris. When we begin to learn and grow in the living waters of Torah, numerous obstacles arise. The same thing happens when people try to make Aliyah, for example, to Israel. One of the things that we find is Rav Dor does a great job of explaining, saying that going to Eretz Israel is like a fire. It's like a huge fire, and when you get there, if you're not prepared for it, it'll consume you. And it isn't long before some people go to do Aliyah, they get there and they head back home. They just can't handle it. Or they get there and the terrorism is so powerful or so overwhelming in their mind, they leave. They can't handle it. And the reason why is it is a refining fire. It is a very difficult thing. But I want you to understand that when you begin to dig deep within this well, you're going to face a challenge. And the challenge is this. Sometimes the obstacles to getting to the water seems to be so big it's not worth the battle. It's going to feel that way. How do we keep from the obstacles seeming too big? I'm often amazed at an athlete that will torture his body, right? Torture it, and then get into the ring and get bloodied, nose broken, ribs cracked, whatever it may be, right? Completely abused, all for a belt. All for a belt. I don't get it. What's the point? Well, they do get money, absolutely. Yeah. Well, if you're a boxer, yeah. But I'm talking about some of these other guys that do it in cage matches that walk away with $500. I don't understand that, okay? It just doesn't make sense to me. Well, why are they willing to do that? Because the reward is greater to them than the punishment. The reward is greater than the punishment. We will never be able to get to the living water if we don't first see that the living water is the only source of life. There is no life outside of Hashem. Without Hashem, there is nothing, right? Nothing exists outside of the Creator. So if that is the case, if nothing exists outside of the Creator, that means that nothing should stand between me and getting to the Creator. Nothing should stand between me and the Creator, even if it's some small particle of negative character trait that I need to work through, or even if it's some small particle of a tortured mind that I might have over some situation in my life that just seems to block my relationship with the Creator, I should get down on all four of my limbs and start digging with all of my might. You thought I was going to say all four of my legs, but all four of my limbs, and start digging with all my might. Just claw through it until we get to the Creator of the universe. In closing, I think of each one of your journeys and those who will watch this video later. And I hear from individuals all the time, just like you guys, who for a number of years, some 5, 6, 7, 8 years, some 20 years, have dug at this well with the greatest of struggles. People rejecting them and people filling it in with their own physicality, because other people fill it in with their physicality too, right? It's negativity that can fill that in. It's other people's negativity. And finally, when they get to the living water, they're like an island in the sea of the world, and satisfied in Hashem. And yet they seem to be the only one. They're not like you guys who have a community to attend each week. They're by themselves, but they're so satisfied. They're so happy. They're so overjoyed that they have connected to the Creator of the universe and finally found the source. In my own life, and I've reflected this several different occasions, that I look back over the decisions that I made to get to this place in my life, to study Torah, to teach Torah, and to draw close to Hashem. And as I said before, if I was the only person in the world doing this, I would do it. Why? Because I found the source. The source isn't the Nativ Center. The source isn't actually even coming up here and having a Torah class. And I love you guys, but you guys are not the source. And I'm not your source. Right? I'm not your source. The Devar Torah, the word that I teach during the week, is not your source. the videos and the lectures and the writings and all of the things that we consume during the week is not the source. It is not the living water. What is the living water? It is the creator of the universe. Now, mind you, all of the things that we do, we study the text, we read articles, we read the Chumash, all of those help us access the source. It becomes the vessel. And I'll close with this idea of the vessel. We know in Kabbalistic terms that we have to draw a vessel, create a vessel. In many ways, a well is a vessel because it contains living water. This vessel that you finally carve out after working all of this negativity and debris and all the stuff that pollutes your relationship with the Creator, it becomes a vessel. The deeper you dig it, the fresher the water. The deeper and wider you dig it, the cooler the water. And so the process of maintaining this well is a daily process. It never goes away. And if you ever know anything about digging wells, you never, and I'm not talking about modern wells, I'm talking about the old wells. You always want to make sure that you guard that well and keep it protected because you don't want things to fill it back in. So it is important for us to realize that this well is the vessel. We talk about, there's many different kinds of vessels, but that is the key vessel to draw the very presence of God into the center of your life. That concludes this lecture, and we'll go for questions or comments or whatever.